Buongiorno, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here on the occasion of this meeting with Vincenzo Boccia, the president of Confindustria, the Italian Industrialists Association. Welcome here, Mr. Boccia. Vincenzo Boccia was elected as the president, the 30th president of Confindustria on the 30th of May last. As a young entrepreneur, he's been very active in the Industrialists Association. He was the president of the Young Industrialists. In 2000, he was the national vice president, and we met in 2009. From 2009 to 2013, he was the president of small and medium-sized enterprises. During the presidency of Mrs. Quincy, he was in charge of the Credit and Finance Department of Confindustria. Our idea today was to have a debate and to talk about the economic governance of our country. I would like to start by asking Mr. Boccia why your company, Boccia Arti Grafiche in Salerno, in the south of Italy, so a company working in a sector where there is fierce competition, and actually several companies in this sector have already closed down and other companies are lagging behind. So my question is, why has your company grown from 2008 to date with a turnover increase of 325%, if I'm not mistaken, with investments of about 50 million euros? So what's the reason? What's the strategy that lie behind this development? Then I'd like to start talking about your experience and to dwell on other topics. Thank you. So to answer very briefly to your question, I'd like to focus on the know-how of our company. And I'd like to mention a sentence which is very much Einstein-like. He used to say, an idea that doesn't seem absurd has few possibilities not to be fulfilled. I've recently looked at data of Mediobanca 15 days ago, and actually, based on this data, our sector, which had a loss of 90% in added value and 35% of productivity, actually, I also wondered why I'm still surviving given such data. In fact, this well reflects the situation of the Italian industrial sector. There are no innovative industrial sectors in mature or non-mature sectors, but there are innovative companies. So we did something very simply. We transformed a problem, a challenge, into an opportunity. We used the internet. Actually, with internet, the quantity of printed paper in the world has shrunk. This applies also to the Italian market. However, the market geography of the printing industry has widened, because today you can access data from clients that are based very far away from your plant. They can be based away from Paris, from London, in other words, from the areas where the printing sector, the publishing sector is so strong. So you can access real-time data from faraway places. You transform this data into printed paper and you send them to these countries. So the internet constraint which caused the shrinkage of the printing of paper actually, thanks to technology, can enlarge our market. Furthermore, we have a good organization of our installations. We have a first organization of installations in Europe, and we have a strong organization that makes it possible for us to be competitive in other countries as well. That's yet another big challenge, which in a mature sector like ours, which gives us lots of possibilities because we can react to these challenges. And then there's another important issue. We've understood that we had to be excellent in any department of the sector, from the finance department to the production and so on, and not only in one of these departments. This has applied to the whole Italian industrial sector. Up to the 1950s, actually, we used to think that production would suffice. But today you have to be good in any department, in any sector. So from producers to enterprises, to the institutions. That's a huge leap forward in the challenge that lies ahead for our country. And furthermore, our vision is no longer based on sectors. We have proven that in a mature sector, that of the printing paper, we can still grow. So the problem lies not so much in the sector, but rather into being innovative or not so innovative. So this also belongs to the new entrepreneurial style that you've oftentimes demanded from Italian enterprises. What do you think this kind of huge leap forward in terms of quality consists of? I'd also like to talk about productivity. One of the fundamental issues mentioned over the last few years is that Italian enterprises have a serious problem of productivity. We just have to think that in Italy, productivity has grown up by 1%, while in the major European countries, it has grown up by 18%. So, compared to the situation of Italian enterprises, so cultural leap and productivity, how do you see them? Actually, productivity requires a new industrial policy in our country. Over the last 15 years, compared to Germany, productivity in Italy has gone down by 30%. So the cost of labor per productivity unit was 100 in Italy and in Germany. Now it's 130 in Italy and 100 in Germany, and that's a major problem. This is a topical, current problem, and it is potentially a future problem if it is not solved. It's not only an industrial problem. It is a problem because we use the same currency, and this means that the stronger country, in other words, Germany, has in a way depreciated this currency to the detriment of our country. So we lost in terms of productivity. Looking at the German model, there's one essential area where productivity was recovered by identifying a direction of the industrial sector, focusing on future industrial possibilities, especially in Germany and in the Western world in general. So, high added value industrial sector, high investment intensity, and high quality. So this already gives us a few data for our economic analysis. As regards the way in which Germany solves its productivity issue, actually this dates back to Mr. Schröder, Gerhard Schröder. He basically invented the so-called exchange of productivity with special types of contracts with two major effects. There was an increase in productivity in German factories, and the second was a methodological approach. Based on that approach, we basically shifted from conflicts within factories to an idea of collaboration to favor productivity. If you exchange wages with productivity and the wealth that is created in that plant, you attribute it to the workers. Of course, it is in the interest of workers that that factory goes well, and it is both in the interest of workers as of shareholders as well as of the owners. So thanks to a specific tax and economic line in Germany, there is an increase. This kind of policy was avoided in Italy. The productivity of a company is a productivity of the production factories, not only of the industry. And we, in Italy, have to work on industrial relations. We have to work together with trade unions, the Italian industry. So we, enterprises and trade unions, have to help industries to recover productivity. And then investments, private investments, have to be made. But these are the two options, the two ways to go, but they have to go hand in hand. They shouldn't be self-exclusive. And this also implies a tax policy guiding certain choices in a certain way. Talking about the guidance and what Italian enterprises should do. Well, to answer this question, if we were to summarize an analysis in a world in which sector average values are no longer significant, well, if you consider that the companies of a sector in any industrial sector in Italy, 20-30% of these companies go very well, then about 60% perform very performed badly, and the rest very badly. So all the three groups of companies have to be represented. And you have to represent the three. The ones actually which go medium well are puzzled about the situation. The ones that actually are not doing well do not want any increase. The 20% of those companies go well probably because they are innovative. So the challenge for the country from a macroeconomic viewpoint lies in the fact that 60 or 70% in the middle actually do the same things of the 20% well-performing countries. Because actually you have to have a good vision. If you have a 20% of companies that are innovative, they have higher wages, they have this exchange of wages and productivity, that's probably the way that should be opted for by the Italian industry. This brings about two functions for Confindustria. A training function, a training task. We have to talk to big as well as small and medium-sized enterprises and give them guidance. And then the second is to guide the tax and political policy. So we have to be entrepreneurs and not only producers. So doing a product is the precondition to enter a market. So this means that we have to work on other sectors. The situation for Italian enterprises is very complex exactly because of this. So the enterprise has to become an institution, an enterprise in which you have well-diversified roles, you have the same result, you want to converge towards the same result, and it's not easy at all, especially in a country where we were told that clashes within industrial relations was the solution. So we basically confounded merit with credit, and basically if I were today to say something against the banks or the trade unions, there would be this would be news in the papers, and we wouldn't have solved anything. And I'm more in line for a for the substance. Actually, I am working in the printing sector, so me saying these things is quite controversial, but this is what I believe, and you have to accept it.
So responsibility of companies, of social partners and politics. So let's move on to the third point. Minister Calenda yesterday said there is a need for a large industrial plan. He announced such a plan to foster investments in this country. Is this one of the various announcements, or is it going to be something that will certainly help the recovery? You should ask this to Minister Calenda. Well, I can tell you whether I share this or not. But I can see three aspects in this interview. Three aspects which are interesting. The first one, Minister Calenda talked about a time schedule. Calenda is saying that we need to enlarge the cake, otherwise we would not have almost anything to share. So we need to have a certain kind of view. Do you share that we have a priority, that of enlarging the cake before dividing it? We share this view. We share this view, and as we would say it, growth comes first. So richness comes first, because thanks to the growth, you can solve the three major issues, growth, debt, and deficits. Can we solve the issues with austerity, or is it better to increase growth and to focus on growth? So we should be more courageous. As happens in the US, when there's a convergence between economic policy and monetary policy, there's a bouncing of the economy, and there is a double growth compared to that which is being recorded in Europe and in Italy. So what are the priorities? It is very interesting to read that one of the members of the government of Italy is talking about priorities. Politics means priorities. So I am at the meeting. I was amazed by a round table an answer by Joaquim Navarro Valls several years ago after the question of a journalist. He had to say what impressed him most of his experience with Pope Wojtyla. He answered that Pope Wojtyla managed to distinguish and to make a difference between important issues and non-important issues. This is a key concept. If we cannot distinguish the urgent and important things in Italy, and if we do not manage to make choices, this is politics. We should not focus on anti-politics. Politics means making choices. This is our first issue. And then Calenda also said that we should be aware, because Italy has a very powerful industrial apparatus which should be made more competitive thanks to the selective choices when it comes to the offer. We need to find the tools to make this industry more competitive. Thanks to the policy of offer, we can recover, we can have a greater growth in Italy, and we can have an increase in the demand. The debate today on the newspapers is focusing on several aspects. Of course, we are also touched upon, and many people are criticizing us because we actually need the politics of demand. This is wrong. We do not ignore the demand, which is also our own aim. As industrialists, if you have an increase in demand, it means that companies will increase their sales. So Schneider is almost moved, almost touched by what I'm saying. This is an essential element, but how can you achieve the reactivation of the demand? You achieve it through the increase of offer and the politics of offer. So thinking about productivity, that's a segment of fiscal policy. If we managed to detax the prices and the facilitations given for production, we would direct the choices of many companies in this way. Our friends from the trade unions are saying that 20% of the Italian companies have second-level contracts, so 80% of them don't have this kind of contracts. So the question is, should we stop here? Or should we look at the 20% of companies which are more competitive and with higher wages, therefore working so that the 80% of companies are moving towards the 20% minority? If, according to second-level contracts, we can increase wages and therefore increase productivity, maybe this is the way to go. The workers of the Volkswagen 3 years ago were granted 6,000 euros as an award for their productivity. That was the policy of offer, because you make companies competitive thanks to the increase in the wages, and then it also becomes a policy of the demand. Thanks to the increase in wages, people have more money to spend, and so there is an increase in the demand. So you reactivate demand. If you start from the demand policy without considering the increase in the offer, the country will not be competitive. We have no devaluation at present because we have the same currency as the Germans. So we need to build a structural competitiveness, something which has never been done in Italy. We should recover the policy of offer. Well, I was accused of being stupid when I state these things, but I explained that I'm a stupid, an intelligent stupid, so to say, because I know where we should focus. The policy of demand would be a trouble for Italy if the citizens of Italy do not feel that we are overcoming anxiety in the economy. You cannot work, you cannot focus on increasing the demand. If I am anxious, the first thing I do is save. I save money because I am afraid of the future. And so we need to remove another issue, which is not economic but has impacts on the economy. This issue is anxiety, and in southern Italy, anxiety takes on the name of addiction. Addiction and anxiety are the two major problems of Italy. There is a risk of uncertainty on the one hand, and on the other hand, many people are resigned. They say that nothing will ever change, and so it is worthless to act. But we, as industrialists, love this country, we want to invest in Italy, and we should give an idea of economic policy which is in the interest of Italy. The other interesting statement by Calenda, which we share, and that was an evolution of the thought when it comes to the context, is that he identifies in economic policy horizontal factors which do not belong to the sectors, on which, paradoxically, but it's not a paradox, it's my provocation, paradoxically, we share the same views. We should not focus on sectoral policies, but we should focus on factor-based policies. The fact of identifying factor-based policies in a sector tells us a couple of things. A good key for reading the future of Italy, and secondly, interpreting a vicious policy that we've been subject to, it is possible to avoid interchanges. The president of Confindustria represents the graphic industrial sector, and I could open a platform saying that since this industry is in crisis, an industrial plan choosing the freedom of thought linked to the Italian printing industry refers to industry. So I can be a villain if I want, but it's not my nature. So Confindustria, as an institution, identifying in the factor-based policy the way to go, and thanks to the minister stating that we should focus on our horizontal policies, well, I think these are two added values in this country. We're running a risk, however. On the one hand, we state this, but on the other hand, we decide to resort to a sort of far west, so to say. We should not reason in terms of a logic based on associations, on sectors. We should do something very right. I should say that in Italy we have taxes on the production factors, which is anti-economy. So the IMU, a tax on property, which is equal to 10 billion euros, this is unfair in Italy. So if I want to play a part in the recovery of country, I can raise this issue. So I am aware that Italy has a very, very high public debt, and I need to identify selective elements of economic policy to provide Italy with prospects for the future. I must feel myself co-liable. So liable as others are. When we talk about responsibilities or liabilities in Italy, it is always the responsibility or the liabilities of other people. So I want to share the responsibility. For once, we accept to take our part of responsibilities, but on the other hand, we demand the responsibility of all. The growth of a country is not just a matter of politics, of economy. It is a matter an issue involving all the citizens. All the citizens should feel equally responsible. Otherwise, some experts should do something else. This is a very thorny moment, and we have a chance to talk about a future for an industrial country, a country which has great potentials, and we may have a beautiful future. The Chinese said that when it rains, the stupid people curse the gods, whereas the intelligent people open the umbrella. So if when it rains, instead of blaming the others, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we acknowledge that it is also our fault, maybe we will open up the umbrella instead of blaming the others. Of course, we should cover not only ourselves but also the other. We should shelter all the other people as well. So this is the way to go, and we should all share the same cultural identity. So I have to say that I've always appreciated the idea that everyone should have his or her own share of the responsibility. So You coined this word, the modern capitalism, which should be introduced in Italy. As for the factors you've just listed, I guess that these factors are part of this concept, but insofar as this does not become an exclusive kind of capitalism, but which contributes to the growth of the country in an inclusive way. Well, the paradox is that in the Western countries we talk about modern capitalism, and the former communist countries are still in a sort of a wild capitalism. But this is the falling point, so to say, and we should work on this. We should work on an idea of country, of modern capitalism that has an inherent idea, the idea of society, a broader idea, an inclusive society. What is a factory if not a small community within a large community, be it a country, be it a continent? The factory is a small community. So if we manage to do this in areas when there are invisible revolutions underway, so if that 20% of companies are moving forward, those companies are the future. The workers of those companies are putting in place the capacity to react. But we cannot read it because we focus on the average. The average has negative indexes. But if you analyze it, you see that there is a small percentage of companies doing very well and a small percentage of companies lagging behind. That idea is a determinant idea, a fundamental idea for an inclusive society, and it becomes a cultural idea, in addition to being an economic idea. Profit is not an aim; it is a tool. So if profit were the only aim, well, the mafia would be a value. When did I realize this? When I was engaged in small size companies. There's a person following what I'm saying to check whether I'm telling the truth or not. So when I was a president of Confindustria, it was a wonderful experience, and I would like to share it with you. A few years ago, if you asked an entrepreneur, the first thing they wonder when they entered their companies, they would have answered you how my company will look like in a few years. If we make the same question, ask the same question today, the answer we receive in 80% of the cases is, I wonder how my country will be in a few years. This means two things. First of all, a wide, broad cultural awareness, and the awareness that we can do a lot, but not alone. So we have a broader cultural issue, but also an economic issue. I can be very strong within the gates of my factory, but when I go out, if I start to have a deficit in terms of competitiveness, I will lose segments, I will lose fragments, and if there is a country which is more competitive than my country, well, this situation will lead me to failure. So the idea of country is connected to the economic view they have. But we as Confindustria should exploit this well, in the good sense of the term, and we can build a broader cultural dimension of the idea of country. When somebody is questioning the fact that Confindustria is dealing with politics, well, I don't know what to say. So what else should we do as Confindustria? So when we talk about the policy based on offer and not on the demand, we express an idea of economic policy, and it is right for an intermediate body of the state to deal with economic policies. We should be worried of the contrary, and this must be done remaining equally distant from the parties, from the political parties. Politics is too important an issue to be left only in the hands of politicians. So we cannot accept the monopoly of politics only by politicians. It is our duty to propose an idea which can be accepted or not. If somebody has an idea of policy which leads to the creation of more problems, it is our duty to say so and to oppose this kind of idea. The fact of saying yes to the next referendum in October starts from the fact that if we want to have a long-term view, the patience mentioned by President Mattarella means that you need to have stability. You need to have a view of a stable government. Otherwise, we run the risk of being in an electoral campaign every 6 months. This does not lead to stability. And this affects the economic situation as well. So we start from economy to reach another sector, to reach the sector of politics. So if you think about it, there is a very beautiful sentence by Jean Monnet. My aims are political, my explanations are economical. We start from economical explanations and we reach political choices which can totally overturn the fate of a country. According to my point of view, which of course can be criticized, if we base our action on the policy of offer, we should have patience, knowing that there is the politics is not does not occur at the same time as economy. The effects of German productivity are the effects of the choice made by Schroeder 15 years ago. If you want everything and at once, and you don't have the tools to govern in the medium term because of potential events which may create complications, well, the problem is that the country will not be successful. So the General Council of Confindustria, made of entrepreneurs of various political ideas, decided to endorse the referendum, to vote yes for the next referendum. Somebody said that if the Confindustria says yes, we should vote for no. So if the Italian industrialists say something, we should go against them. We are explaining the reasons why we should vote yes. We would like to have a title in which you explain both the reasons for voting yes and the reasons for voting no. So I don't want to dwell on the possible future situations after a possible victory of the no at the referendum, but this is another story, and I will tell you next year if you invite me again.
Let's now talk about the relationship between the economy and politics. Your company is based in Salerno, the south of Italy, so you talking about the south of Italy, you know this topic very well. You said that for the south of Italy, we don't need extraordinary policies. We need more intensive policies, but policies that are the same applied in the rest of to the rest of the country. Well, I've recently read an article which stated that the good for Italy is the good for the south of Italy. So this basically means that when economic policy tool works, so for example, you may have the so-called Sabatini law for investments that works, that is a stimulus for investments, and you realize that since the introduction of the tool, private investments have started. For example, in Italy, there is maybe another association producing tool machines that from the start of the Sabatini law, there was an improvement of private investments. That means that that's a tool which is working. In the past, the logic was different. The idea was probably that a certain tool would give us something back, and so we would have to invent something similar. So today, you need to focus on tools that are really working, and those are the things that you should focus on. This is well related to the South, because in answering the question related to the industrial sector we want to have, and if we want to consider the industrial issues, one of the big issues of this country, and if we don't want an industrial policy in which we have a competitive country, if we want all this, you have to reach a stage in which certain economic policy choices are in line with a high productivity, high investment intensity, high added value country. Well, probably what's needed for the country then is exactly what's needed for the South. If there's a Sabatini law is good for the country, you have to have a super Sabatini law also for the south of Italy. In the south, there were lots of tools favoring investments in the development of the south, but there were too many of them. We have to be focused and determined at the same way. We have to have a single policy for the country, which is particularly intensive for weaker parts of the country, covering aspects like productivity, private investments, and so on. So that's one of the issues we have to face. Otherwise, we run the risk that, in spite of having just one single economic policy for the country, from which you can derive good guidelines for the Italian industry, instead of having that, you would have just one policy for Italy and 8 different local economic policies. So while Minister Calenda talks about the policy of offer and production factors locally, you have some local governors that actually talk about factors. So we have to choose one way. Either we focus on sectors or we focus on factors. We have to focus on... The Italian policy means this, that we have to simplify things that are complex. We don't have to make simple things complex, and we have to strengthen the things that have worked, both nationally and policies. So this is really simple. But in this country, actually, simple things are not very much appreciated. Most of the times you fear... it seems to me that it is complicated things that are more appreciated. Before you asked, you talked about complications. These complications make Italy the country with the highest quality entrepreneurs of the world. I'm being positive about this. I don't want to be positive. So I'm using a very bad piece of data to be optimistic. And the optimistic information is that I am basically optimistic in expectations and pessimistic in terms of forecasts. Compared to Germany, we're the second biggest industrial company in Europe, but an Italian company pays 30% energy more, 20% global tax rate more, and we have 30% cost of labor, a 30% higher cost of labor. So we rank second, and we have these handicaps. If these handicaps are removed, we could be the best in the world. That's, of course, normal. It cannot be but normal that we are the best in the world when we operate on foreign markets. So this might be the hand of a higher power, and probably this higher power has probably understood that we want, as Italians are so good, we needed to have things complicated. So the world is in front of us. Italy will make it. I'm sure of that. We shouldn't say this too loud to politicians, otherwise they do nothing. But talking about our potential, we can make it. And I've understood why we're good. We're good because we rank second in spite of having so many obstacles. If these obstacles were removed, we could be the very first. These handicaps are factors. So, taxes, energy, productivity. And these factors are the ones that have to be solved with the offer, with the supply policy. So basically, this is the ultimate basis. The focus should be on supply and not so much on demand. We have to talk to them and tell them that we are working to the interest of demand, of the demand side, starting from the supply side. And they don't understand this because actually their task is only to make simple things complicated. But we are there to work also for them. Don't worry about that. So when I analyze the issue of productivity, I had a look at some information a couple of years ago, and based on this data, the 40,000 best Italian enterprises have a productivity which is higher than the German ones. So this is definitely possible. But my question is, why don't we look at the best companies and try and learn from them? And why do you continue looking for alibis? Well, I agree with you on this. I think we have to do two things. One thing's internally in Confindustria. All our members have to understand what the best ones have done. If these best performers are so competitive, despite the many handicaps of our companies, it means that their competitivity pluses are much better. Clearly, we have to explain this to our members in Confindustria, but it is not always easy. Generational transfer. So the entrepreneurs who first founded the companies and didn't think at the future of these companies, and from the end of the Second World War have always been successful just focusing on one product. I'm saying this as the son of a producer. My father set up the company I work for, and he was a printer. He knew how to print. And he started this business in a world in which there was no overcapacity in terms of production. But now we live in a world in which there's overcapacity of production. So at the time, the very simple fact of being able to produce was a competitivity factor. Then he evolved. There was a second generation of entrepreneurs. We together we worked together and had experience and traditions and the complexity and the European vision coexist. All these things coexisting. So it's easy to say, but it's very difficult to implement this. Some steps will be very difficult, and the ones that will not be so difficult will probably be in the hands of companies that will be acquired by others. Actually, we shouldn't be worried by this, because if we want to attract investments in the country, we should accept the fact that some Italian companies will have to be bought by foreign companies. But Confindustria has the task of telling its own entrepreneurs what the guidelines for the future are for Italian companies. And at the same time, while explaining what to do to be competitive, if you look at the statements, financial statements of these companies, over the last 2 years, many investments have been made in intangible assets compared to the past. To the past, lots of tangible assets were purchased. Today, lots of investments are done in identity, marketing, lean organization, brand, so intangible assets. And this leads to a second question. So, what's the relationship with our banks? Are Italian banks capable to assess the complexity of the so-called intangible indexes of our companies? If you apply to a bank and tell them that you no longer want to be a subcontractor and you want to have your own brand, and that you need to have resources to set up your advertising campaign, that's an intangible asset. Now, is the financial system capable of understanding if that advertising campaign will be successful or not, and if that industrial intangible strategy will work or not? If you so that's a whole different story. So the challenge today lies in the fact that 60% of enterprises in between the good and the bad ones makes this huge cultural leap, pointing to the best performers in class. And on the other hand, we have to make economic policy choices and establish relations with financial and economic institutions that can help us lead the choices of these companies in that direction. We are in the very middle of a transition phase of the Italian industrial sector. This is a very important and new task of associations. You talked about banks. You talked about banks, credit, and finance, the financial sector. Banks need to give credit, otherwise they are not doing their job. At the same time, there are lots of outstanding bad debts. They did well as regards the ECB stress tests. At the same time, however, we know that there are lots of Italian companies that have lots of debts and have vis-à-vis the banks. So what's the way out from all these factors which are not so virtuous? Here too there is a very important basic cultural issue to solve. An opportunity might lie in a very complex and strange scenario characterized by lots of liquidity, lots of cash, but this cash is not given to the real economy. So it is given a lot of it is given to the best performers, the 20% of companies I mentioned before, only to a limited extent to the 60% of companies mentioned before, and not at all to the worst performers. Banks have zero interest rates. That's yet another issue. But there's an opportunity that we have identified, and that applies both to companies and to banks. I think we should make a second quality leap. In other words, we shall no longer work on debt instruments. Our objective is namely to consolidate the assets of our companies, and therefore we should help them grow without debt. So in this case, we shouldn't establish a mini bond instead of a debt, because that's always inevitably going to be considered a debt by a company. So there might be a difference for the banks. You no longer have the intermediation of the bank, but for the company it's always the same. So the challenge for the enterprise is basically to open up their capitals. Companies should be less and less family owned or family related. They should become less and less patriarchal, and that's a cultural issue. And they should grow more and more without a debt. And this in a world that no longer makes money on deposits, in a world in which banks no longer make money on state bonds. So in such a context, if we manage to create a model in which we can develop governance models for companies, there is actually a project, the elite project of the Italian Stock Exchange, and Confindustria is an active part of this project. The project foresees the presence of Italian companies which are showcased in a way, and they are brought to the attention of the financial institutions. So you don't lose the governance of your company. You only sell a minority share. Your company can grow. You can grow without a debt, and you can set up an adequate, useful pathway. This elite project of the Italian Stock Exchange has involved about 300 companies. Our objective here, and Confindustria has to be very proactive in this, is that at least thousands of companies participate in this project. If we manage to have about 1,000 companies participating in these elite projects every year, and if each of these companies attracted about, on average, 5 million companies euros, there would be private investments. And if this money were turned into investments and could provide support instruments like the Sabatini law, we might start a virtuous circle in which the country can grow by combining innovative finance and the strategy of helping companies to grow without a debt. And then there's a second issue. We should accelerate a discussion with ABI, the Italian Banking Association, in which banks can be taught how to better evaluate and assess intangible assets. We're living, as I told you, in a world characterized by productivity, lean organization, branding, and so on and so forth. So if your financial system is not capable of assessing those assets, then you are bound to have problems, and that's a problem. However, if you remove this thing and you find partners willing to enter the company, probably these partners will be able to assess that. So enterprises should be evaluated at the same level of the big institutions. This is a revolution, but we can make it. There are tools. We have tools available, and the Elite project of Borsa Italiana is one of them. And this should be done in order so much for only 20 or 30,000 companies to be the leading companies of Italy. That's nice, of course, for those companies and Italy, but that's not a good project for the whole country. What you say applies very well for well-structured companies which have high-level governance. Otherwise, this is not easy to do it. How about the so many micro-enterprises, the many small and medium-sized enterprises? How can they be framed in this context? They don't get cash. Why don't they get cash? Because the rules are too stringent, or because banks do not want to take on additional risks? Actually, we have two things to say. You can become great and big by remaining small. If your objective is to intercept markets, Europe or in Europe or outside Europe, well, clearly you have to be to have a certain size. Underneath that size, I won't make it. If you don't do it, either you have to grow, you have to open up your company to others, or you have to engage in M&A operations, or you have to, for example, sign a networking contract. But much depends on the style of the enterprise. So first question, what kind of segment? Decision over the context and the segment. If you want to intercept global markets, the new rich of the world, for example, the Chinese have now become consumers and not only producers. If your objective is this, you have to have a minimum size, enabling you to have to be based in China or in London. And this means that from the merely industrial viewpoint, means being small means that you have to become bigger, because from an industrial viewpoint that's not going to be convenient. And that's one solution. And then there is an internal solution. You have small entrepreneurs who can use the internet. These tools are very useful to sell their products in the world. That's yet another approach. Third issue, is it banks that do not lend money, or is it the problem? Is it or are the enterprises to blame? Normally, I tend to tell my colleagues, would you supply your goods to a customer which is about to go bankrupt? So the same applies to the bank. I mean, if the bank is facing with a company that has a problem, of course they're not willing to give money. And then Basel III also applied more stringent norms. So the system has to be changed, and together with the Italian Banking Association we can work on this evolution of the industrial sector. And this in a paradoxical world, in a world that is full of liquidity, and this liquidity doesn't reach the companies for this reason, and also for a second reason, for the fact there is total lack of consistency between the ECB monetary union and the European and national economic policy. There is an inconsistency. Mr. Draghi works on the so-called anti-cyclical policy, so he brought tax interest rates to zero. The austerity policies actually are breaking the economy, so the two policies are opposed. This does not take place in the United States, because in America the Fed has an expansive monetary policy and the government has an expansive economic policy. The two legs of the economic policy are in line, and no one of them is a break for the other. So growth in economic terms, consistency with monetary policy, and actually those who do anti-cyclical policy actually grow more than us. Then you have to do it in a very good way, in a selective way. You have to identify the kind of industry. This lies in the interest of Italy and also of Germany. It is in the interest of Europe as well, because we live in a Europe that's the richest market in the world and has an aggregated debt that is lower than the ones of the United States. In spite of this, we only suffer negative shocks, and we are not in a condition of creating and implementing positive shocks. So I really hope that the meeting in Ventotene actually provides the three leaders with the same vision of Spinelli in 1940-41. In those years, what Spinelli proposed was impossible given the context of the time. And even sometimes when we talk about the federal Europe, we are told that that's impossible. This is something that shouldn't be done today. Well, this I don't know. We at Confindustria would like to have to be far-sighted. We would like to think about the federal Europe, and we would like to think about an European economic policy that can bring about a shock in the interest of European citizens, in the interest of Italy, and in the interest of Europe that can determine important shocks with major potential. Lots of companies are coming back to Europe. And this very fact, as well as the fact that many people are looking back to Europe, thereby ignoring that this is the richest market in the world, this means that we have not even understood where we live. So the economic issue is very important. So back to the issue of Jean Monnet, my objectives are political, my explanations are economic. Back to what he said, we have to only hope that Mr. Renzi, Mr. Hollande, and Madame Merkel actually want to start from economic data, economic explanations to achieve political objectives. Otherwise, you may have lots of problems for those who deal with the economy, because we do that. If we make wrong choices in our companies, we go bankrupt. Nobody's going to recover us. And so we have to be very careful. That's the reason why I don't sleep at night. Actually, I'm telling this to my wife. She's sitting in the front row, and that's the reason why. That's one of the reasons why I don't sleep at night.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I would have had other questions, but a final question for you. So the way you talk, the way in which you propose your candidature for the president of Confindustria, you studied from universities and associations. It is clearly visible that you have a passion for associations. You strongly believe in them. But at the same time, we talk about the crisis in representation. Many associations are losing members, associates. There are lots of internal crises. What's your interpretation of the current moment vis-à-vis this lack of participation? Is the society getting self-destroyed? Are we moving towards individualism, or do we still have values to give to Italy? Well, I think we do have values. We should conquer the role and not declare the role. So the role and the leadership is made of many elements that I was taught while I was working with young entrepreneurs. Some of them are here. So you need to be consistent and exemplary. So you need to be consistent. What you preach should be what you do, and then you should act. You should say something, and then you should act accordingly. Otherwise, those who follow you will notice this. This is the first issue. The second is that it is useless for you to declare and make statements, or it is useless for other people to declare whether you matter, you're important or not. Politics is not going to be the one sector defining your importance or lack of importance. We only try to work. If you conquer leadership, then you have to be consistent. You have to act accordingly. following feelings and substance. As for the feelings, you should transform rage, wrath into passion. So instead of simply getting mad about things not working, you should focus on your passion and you should try and look for a solution instead of blaming other people. We are not tourists, we are citizens. I always get very angry when I listen to people or to my friends blaming Italy, talking about the Italians, as if he were not or she were not an Italian as well. And so Biagio was right when he said that being Italians is a profession. So these are not citizens, and we should fight against them. I work for the Italians as citizens. The other question, the other issue is representation. What do we mean by representing vested interests? I will make a resume of my idea, a summary of my idea. We should call the attention of our colleagues, and this is something we've done during a meeting with our colleagues in a very harsh debate, and we also try to catch the attention, to draw the attention of the country. So we need to be consistent, of course, as I said earlier. Representing means being a bridge between the interests of the companies and the interests of the country. So we should not simply defend our interests. Before calling upon the government of a country to focus on certain issues, we have the duty to answer the first question: whether the proposals we are figuring out are in the interest of the country. If they are, we should strive for them to be heeded. If they only refer to vested interests, at that point you should exit Confindustria because you're not going to be represented. We are sorry if somebody decides to move out of Confindustria, but we are not here to defend the interests of one entrepreneur or one single sector. We should represent the interests of the country, first of all. If you share these ideas, please, you are an entrepreneur, please become a member of Confindustria. Join Confindustria, because we are living a season of convergence of thoughts. We need to tell the citizens that Italy can have a great future, and we should have the representation of citizens wanting a better future. This is the beautiful part of being in such an association, because you feel the passion of living the present moment in order to live in the future. Living for the future is the best thing that can happen to you. I am nostalgic about the future, so to say. And I look forward for tomorrow to come. Thank you very much. I wish you all fruitful work and fruitful proceedings.